All right, hello everyone. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me and see me. I haven't done one of these for a little while. I had some problems with the streaming software, so hopefully this is working. I just got it fixed all at the last minute, so my heart's racing a little bit. It's nice to see you, everyone. Yeah, it's been a while. We did so many of these during the pandemic, but we haven't done one for a little while. Sounds good, looks good. All right, awesome. Oh, hey Jennifer, how's it going? Nice to see you. Okay, it's working by some miracle. Now, if for any reason things go down, we'll try and restart it on the channel or something, or look out for a community post or something like that on our channel, and we'll try and keep it going. But hopefully this is going to last all the way through the hour, and hopefully I can get through all these points within an hour, because values, there's a lot to say, although actually surprisingly straightforward. One thing I wanted to say right off the bat is, some of these ideas you may have come across before, right? I've heard these ideas like pretty much most like books about drawing and painting. Most courses are going to start or have very early on ideas about values, and it's always about simplifying values, and a lot of the ideas we're going to talk about today. And then when I would chat to Jared, who's been teaching me painting for a few years, very often in the call he would have to kind of reiterate these ideas again to me, and so I guess my point is, if you have known some of these ideas for a while and still struggle to actually implement them, you're not alone. I'm right there with you. There's either nothing wrong with us or there is something wrong with us, but either way, we're in it together. I don't know. It's, for me, getting good with values, and I still have a long way to go, but making progress with this skill has been much harder than with perspective, much harder than anatomy, harder than gesture, harder than forms and simplifying forms, harder than color, and for whatever reason, I don't really know, because as we get into this, I think it's going to be relatively straightforward to understand, and that can be kind of frustrating, right? It's like, I get it, but boy, does it take a long time to really get to grips with it, at least for me anyway. And hopefully this will help. Maybe later I'll show you my struggles with it, some of my long history of struggles with this. So sorry, I've been talking about values as if you know exactly what that is, and you probably do, but just in case you don't, or maybe this is the first time you're coming across these ideas, values, we're talking about going from light to dark, and there's a lot of, mid-tones in the middle of that, right? There's a huge range of sort of, I guess you could say, grays in the middle, dark grays all the way up to light grays, and then there's the white. So when you're starting a drawing, say, you've got the white of the paper quite often, you're starting at one end of the value range, you're getting your pencil or charcoal or whatever it is, and you're just moving areas towards the darker end of the value range. That's what we're doing. And so when we're talking about shading, what we're really talking about is values. You could get a black piece of paper, get a white pencil or something and move areas towards the light. It's all the same thing. We're just moving areas to the light or the dark end of the spectrum. Okay. All right. And I'm going to be checking in with the chat. Also, my wife is moderating as well. And okay, so let me share my iPad screen and hopefully this works. Okay, so we didn't want it that way. We didn't want it that way. We wanted it that way. So hopefully this works. And we're going to be, we're going to kind of draw this basically in terms of values later. But first, we're going to talk about the first challenge with values, all right? So the way that a value is created, like how light or dark something is, do you know what? Let me just grab this and make it black and white, so we're really just focused on the values and not the colors. And when we're talking about the values here, it's partly about the light that's hitting the form and how much light. So you can see that, you know, the shirt here is pretty much going to be the same color all the way around, but it's a lot darker here than here, obviously, because up here we're getting light, and down here we're not getting the light. So the light is a big component. And then the second component is the local color. So the color of the object itself. So when we come down to, let's say, the jeans, even though they're also being hit by light, they're going to have a darker value than the shirt because the shirt is a lighter local color. And so even when we get into the shadow, the value in the shadow part of the shirt might not get as dark as the shadow, as the value in the shadow part of the trousers, because the trousers also have a darker local color, right? And even on my face here, you know, if let me turn one of these lights off, hopefully you can still see my face. You know, even though my eye is being hit by light, you know, the pupil is dark because of the local color, the color of the pupil itself. And then on my skin, the area that's being hit by light is a light value here, but as it turns away from the light and goes into shadow, now it's getting into a dark value, right? So let me turn this back on. So, you know, we've got values being created by light and also by the local color. Now, how much light is hitting any area is based on the form, right? So if we look at this guy, right, this side of the form is facing the light, so it's getting a lot of light, and then it turns away from the light, and then down here, this side is facing away from the light, and now it's not getting as much value, right? Because it's not getting as much light, so that affects the values. Your video is obscuring it a bit. Okay, my wife helping me out here. So let me just move this over. So in this way, values and forms are inextricably linked, right? So when we talk about values and forms as separate skills, you know, they are kind of two sides of the same coin. And actually that's the case with all of figures. And that makes sense because ultimately it's about the figure. So the figure's tying everything together. But the value helps us to explain the form. Understanding the form helps us to understand the values, right? Okay, so what are the challenges? Why is this hard to get an image like this and then draw it and capture the values, capture the areas of light and capture the areas of dark? Why is that tricky? There's a few challenges and we're going to get to the first one. The first one is if you have a really simple form, so it's just like a box, right? We can see three planes, the top and these two sides, and then maybe there's like a light source coming in this way, right? And so this plane here is in shadow, for example. And so each of these planes is going to have a different value, but we're really more or less just dealing with like three values here because it's such a simple form. We have three simple planes and they have a simple relationship to the light source. And actually it might be a bit more complicated than that, but basically and broadly it's pretty simple because we have a simple form, right? We don't have too many planes to deal with. We're just seeing three planes on this box, right? We got 1, 2, and 3 in the shadow. Okay, so the challenge is that when it comes to figures, and we've decided we want to be able to draw people, figures are super complicated, okay, because we have a huge array of planes. So even on my face, you know, as you know, across my face, there are so many little variations in the planes. So things are facing, they have different, each part has a slightly different relationship to the light. In this case, I got two light sources on me. I've got an incredible range of planes across my face. And so even though a lot of my face is like lit, each part of my face has a different amount of light hitting it. It's also got slight variations in the local color, right? My skin tones are varying across my face subtly. And then the planes are varying in terms of how much light is hitting them. And it's very subtle as well. And so that complexity is the first challenge. We have a really, really complex job. A camera is going to take in every photon, process it, and then a printer is going to, print out every single little dot. And that's how a camera and printer is going to deal with that. But we are not cameras and printers, and we don't want to be cameras and printers because that would be boring. So therein lies the challenge. Our brains are not going to process that complexity very well, right? So what can we do? Well, we're going to simplify. Okay, so what we're going to try and communicate is we're going to try and communicate a lot of the information, a lot of what matters, with way less information. Okay, so if you ever did maths at school or whatever, you may have had to plot a graph. Wait, let me take the green line off because the green line here is the solution. You have to plot a graph like this. You get these data points. I don't know what this graph is for, right? But it's like showing a relationship, right? And you're trying to communicate what this means to the viewer. And you can kind of see there's a relationship between these two variables. But it's kind of unclear because it's so sort of up and down and kind of chaotic and all over the place. And so what a mathematician or someone will often do is draw the line of best fit through it, right? And when you draw the line of best fit through it, you lose a lot of information, right? You lose the fact that some of these points, like this point is over here, it's deviating from this line, right? And you might get nervous, I'm losing information if I just show that green line, But ultimately, the green line makes it way easier to understand, and it captures almost everything we really need. And this principle of going from all of these dots to just the green line, that mindset, that is pretty much how you learn to draw and paint. It's discarding lots of information and communicating the main thing that actually matters. And you realize that we could have 1 million dots here, right? We could add just zillions of data points here, right? All along this, there could be millions and millions and millions and millions of data points. And we can end up turning millions of data points into a simple line, or even you could just communicate that line with just 2 points, right? You could just say, this is the relationship. We can sense it. We can feel that relationship. And so this is what we are going to be doing with values. And it's also, by the way, what we can do with a lot of our lines and a lot of our forms. And we'll see that in a second. Okay, so in practice, how are we going to simplify the values that we see when they're so complicated? So there's a few different little tools that you can use to help you, right? When we come back to this guy here. The one that you may have heard me talk about if you've seen the videos is squinting, and especially if you're drawing from life, that's going to be a great tool. So you just squint down, maybe close one eye, you squint down, a lot of the little variations start to melt away. Another one is if you're working digitally or as a photo reference, you can make it smaller. And now, again, a lot of the little variations are going to melt away. So there's a couple of tools like that. And you know what? As time goes on, you'll be better able to do this even without any of those little tricks or whatever. But actually, a lot of great artists are always squinting or always looking at it small, And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's really, really helpful to do. And then the second thing that we can do is we can try in the beginning to separate it into 2 levels of value. So some artists may suggest 3 or 4, but ultimately what we're trying to do is bring it right down from millions and millions of levels of value to just 2 or 3 or 4 or something like that. Somewhere in the 2 to 4 range. And we're going to recommend going all the way to 2 because that is really going to clarify your decision making about this. All right. So let me try and show you my drawing I did, I did for this. Okay, so start out trying to map out the shapes and then try to get it to roughly 2 values. Now you can see I've got a few little lines in there because I needed them to help me figure out the relationships between everything. But what I'm really trying to do is bring it to the white of the paper and then 1 value, right? And so think about how much information in this guy and the whole scene we've had to get rid of, we've had to see past to go from the zillion values in the reference to the 2 value version, right? We've kind of had to equate like this. Let me go to the right. This level of dark and even this level of dark. And we've said those 2 levels of dark, they're going to go into this same shape and I'm going to give them the same value. And so you have to have a little bit of confidence to like discard that much information. And so the way that Jared always says it to me is you're putting values into buckets, right? So there could be quite a big range of values, like in this case, going from this value all the way to this dark. And that whole range of value, in this case, for how I started this drawing, they've both gone into the same value bucket, right? So this is my bucket and I just put both of these into the same one. And then everything that's like up here and here, the white of the hat and everything. So these 2 values here, so let me just circle them. In this case, I put them into bucket 2. So I've got bucket 2 and bucket 1. And I'm just getting rid of so much information and just ending up with 2 buckets. And when you're actually drawing and painting, you can allow yourself more buckets, right? You can have more levels of value, but it's really useful to be able to bring it down to 2 or 3 or 4. And especially if you can get to 2, and then you can build from there. So what I'm doing next is I might add a 3rd one now that I've come down to this. Oh, and let me stop right there. Let me stop right there before I get to the next part of that demo. And let me mention that you might say, wait, if I look at this, I might have chosen different buckets. You know, I might have had, let me show you. I might have had this guy. So I guess what I had was something like this, right? But you might have chosen something more like this maybe, where it's just the shadow on the guy that's brought out, you know? There wouldn't be anything wrong with that. Okay, so if that's what you did, if those are the bucket, that's the sort of threshold that you chose. I think it's a guy called Devin Corwin. He's a good painter. He talks about these thresholds and how you can move those thresholds. And so here we've got a nice example with this mug. If you're in our study group, you'll recognize this mug from our value exercises. So here we can set a threshold for what you can see that this mug, we've turned it into 2 levels of value, and we're still getting across the fact that it's a mug and it's sitting on a windowsill or something like that. So we've set the threshold here. What if we changed it and set the threshold here? It would still be fine, you know? It's not like there's a correct answer here. It's just learning to make a decision. Different decisions are going to have different effects. And so you can set that threshold. You could set it here, for example. So what's going to go into the darks? What's going to go into the lights? That's up to you. But the point is being able to take a range of values and put them into the darks and a range of values and put them into the lights. Okay? Now, someone has commented here a really good point. It's really difficult to ignore all of those details. So that is the second challenge right there, you know? The second challenge is we can't easily sort values into buckets. Our brains are not wired that way like a computer. So the computer's done this, right? The software has done these, and it can take each pixel, and it can say this pixel is at this value level, it's at like 50%, and so it's going to go into this bucket. This pixel is at 48%, and it's going to go down into this bucket. That's not how we as human beings see value. All right, that's a huge problem in some ways, right? So why is this a big problem? The way that we see value is in terms of contrast. We see value as it relates to the value that is next to it, right? We don't see it objectively. And I've talked about this on the channel quite a bit, the simultaneous contrast illusion. I talk about it too much, but what I'm trying to say here is that our eyes will often zoom in like this almost, and our brains actually, it's not our eyes, our eyes are doing really well. It's our brains, I think, that's the problem, as is normally the case. I think we do a lot better if we just didn't have brains. But anyway, we've got this value. Why is that not showing up? Oh no, it's because I should be up here. Right, layers. Okay, so this, no, okay. Come on, Procreate. It's actually my fault, not Procreate's fault. So this value here is next to this value. And the way that we're gonna see it is we're gonna think this is lighter than this. And our brains are gonna overinterpret that big time. And we're gonna end up thinking that that should be a lot lighter than that dark bit. And that's how we understand value, not like a computer. And so that's why we're going to way overinterpret these little changes and fluctuations. And then again, what's going to help us is that squint and the zooming out. Zooming out really helps. Let me show you a nice filter that kind of mimics what we're more or less hoping to achieve. So here is a face full of complexity in the values. And then on the right, you see a Photoshop filter, which is almost like we're squinting at it, right? But even better, actually. And it really brings down the complexity and all those little variations and turns them into bigger, simpler shapes, right? Okay, brilliant. So we can either use Photoshop filters and we have some more of these. Another thing we can do when we're studying is use master paintings. Like I think this is Zorn, right? So we can take a master painting because a master painting is already simplified for us because the master artist is really good at it. And then we can, like in this case, apply the filter onto that. And then we end up with a really nice clear-cut, simple set of shapes of value. So that's cool, right? That's cool. All right. Okay. Lovely jubbly. So we come back to this reference here and we go, all right, so I already knew this. We squint at it, we turn it into a couple of levels of value, start at 2 values, then build a third or a fourth or a fifth value on top of that. Easy peasy, right? No, it's still not easy. It's still not easy. Because what we're going to do, what we're going to end up doing is we've simplified the values, but we're gonna overcomplicate the forms and the shapes now, right? Because we like to do that too. All right, let me just check in with the chat and make sure that this is all making sense. Ozor, you're saying sometimes brains are more of a burden than a help. I think it's true. Yeah, that's such a good question, David, asking, is it about what's light and what's dark, or are we analyzing what's exposed to the light and what is turned from the light? And that's a really interesting one, and I've read different books with different approaches because there aren't any correct answers. Sometimes you can paint or draw for the light and play down the local color and really play up the light, and sometimes you can just go to the value, which is whatever the local color plus the light is creating. And what we're talking about today is the value. So the local color plus the light, what's that creating? Almost, you know, like when we look at this, just thinking about the light and dark of this reference, for example, right? Guys, let me know in the chat if everything I'm saying so far is making sense and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. Next thing is making sense, says Gander. Okay, cool. So the next struggle, right, is the forms will overcomplicate the forms and overcomplicate the shapes. All right. So what we want to do then is make the forms a lot simpler, right? Because so that instead of the chaos of this sleeve and the value variations along that sleeve, what we can do is turn this into, just mentally, right? Think about this as a sort of cylindrical shape, basically. And then this part of the cylindrical shape is facing the light. More or less, this part is facing away from the light. And so now we've gone from this really complex value shape to a really simple value shape. And so in that way, simplifying forms helps with our values. And so if we go back to that demo where I was drawing this, in this version, you can see at this point, at this stage, that sleeve, instead of all the complexity of the zigzagging of that sleeve, I've got it as a very simple cylindrical shape. It's actually something that when I first drew this, I went straight to the complexity of the shape because I still can overcomplicate things. It's just our tendency to go to the detail, go to the complexity. And it was our instructor, Marek, in our study group. He saw it, he goes, this is great, but it would have worked best if you had started on that big, simple, cylindrical idea. I was like, yeah, so on my second attempt at this, stuck to that simplicity, even in that sleeve. And then as I go and I keep building, I can cut into that with the rubber, and I can add to it with the pencil and start to bring out some of that complexity if I want. I can start to, and so in this way, what we're talking about with values, where we start with real heavy simplicity, and then we can start to push and pull and cut into it and things like that. We can add more levels of value. We're doing the same thing with forms. We start with big, simple forms, and then we can add on to them, right? It all is basically the same as going from this to this. So we do that with forms. Instead of this really complicated sleeve, we start with that cylinder idea. Instead of 1 million values, we go to 2 values, and then we build. So the whole principle is simple to complex, big to small. That's going to be our savior. There's lots of challenges, and that is going to be our savior at every step, is that big to small, simple to complex sequence, right? And staying on the big and staying on the simple for longer than you might want to, because your brain's going to pull you towards the complex. Again, the brain, the enemy of art. All right, so just in case at this point you're like, I can't do that though, right? I don't know how to do that. Okay, I'm going to show you my progression, which you may have seen at some point, but this is how I used to deal with values, you know. This is like in my early 30s, and this is all through my 20s, hundreds of drawings like this, just kind of lost, just putting patches down, overthinking, like not understanding what I'm looking at, not squinting, and overcomplicating, getting frustrated and just going like that with it kind of thing, right? Same here, you know. And I spun my wheels and didn't really get anywhere for so long. But once I started to do the right kinds of exercises, then things took off very fast. So I got to this, where at least I'm going, okay, this side's facing away from the light, this side's facing the light, and I'm going to simplify it. More or less, you see the hatching's pretty even. Not the greatest drawings, but at this point, I was starting to kind of understand how to find, like, how to merge the values, like take this whole area of value and all the variation in it and just merge it down into one, right? So I start to make progress, start to practice the forms, start to practice the values, eventually start to put the skills together, and eventually be able to do my figure drawing. Now, don't want to stay on that one too long because I'm not sure if YouTube likes live drawings. So, I'll show you more examples from other students and how quickly they could progress on these skills in a second. Okay, getting nowhere for so long sounds familiar, Tessa. Yes, but you jump on those tough. They're tough exercises, but they really work, you know? Okay. Now, what is the next challenge? Because actually, the challenges are not over, all right? So, well, actually, even before I get to that, let me just make a little point that relates to that line graph again, right? So we talked about the sleeve, and we're turning it into this simple form, right? Now, another way that our brains will draw us to overcomplicating things is we're very often going to be drawn to little bumps and things like that, right? So what would maybe in this hand is a reasonable example, where we can see like each finger is making this kind of shape, right, along here. And so as soon as we start to draw this, our brains are going to see that these little bumps, these little variations in the line, and not only try and capture that complexity straight off, our brains are going to start to overdo them and draw them too bumpy like that, right? And so just like that line graph, and just like what we've been talking about, kind of the theme of this whole thing is cut through the noise and just find the big simple line that captures the overall idea well enough in a simpler way. And so that's going to help when you're capturing your shapes of light and dark. That's just going to help with your drawing in general. And that corresponds to the big to small idea. Because once I've got that, then I can start to push, a little bit of detail onto that line. But I want to start with the big simple version first. I want to cut through the noise as much as I can. Even on these genes, for example, it's going to be like, okay, so this bit comes out, then this comes in, like that. And that's why sometimes some of those exercises where you do like the contour drawing and you're like trying to follow every little bump and stuff that you see, it can kind of encourage this coming in, coming out, coming in, coming out. What we want to be able to do here is find, just like those dots on the graph and you do the line of best fit, we want to be able to cut through that noise and find a big simple line that just gives us 99% of the information in one line instead of 50 lines. Okay? All right. Let me check in on the chat. Yeah, so Blackhound here is saying, you're feeling stuck and clueless sometimes, and you see my art from back then and where I am now, and you feel like you can do it. Maybe you saw the case study with Collier the other day on our YouTube channel. Started later than me, started at 45, drawing really nicely at 50, it happens. And I've got a ton of examples like that from our study group, from our community. Okay, so let me check in if there's any other questions. Jennifer, yeah, simplifying the form. Like Jennifer, we were in our figure foundations course that we worked through, right? The rib cage isn't that simple. It's not an egg shape, right? The pelvis area is not a simple pants shape. The head is not that simple egg shape. We're cutting through all of this stuff to find the big idea. And that's exactly the same thing we're going to do with values. It's the same skill. Just basically ignore a bunch of stuff, Ignore a bunch of stuff. Okay. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So Ozil's making a point here. which is, are there any exercises you can do for shading, says Anna. And yeah, Ozil says it's like an exercise where you take anything and you reduce it. And then if you want to like render it further and go into more detail, you go from the simple towards the complex. Instead of taking something complex and trying to go straight to the complex drawing of it, as if you're a camera and printer, you're going to go from this complex reference to a really simple version of it in terms of form, in terms of the lines, in terms of the values. You're going to go to a really simple version of it, and then you're going to build from there. And you're probably not going to want to make it as complex as the original photo was. You're going to want to go super duper simple and then build the complexity selectively based on what you like as an artist. Because otherwise you're just getting into being a camera and printer yourself, right? All right. Okay. So the challenges are not over at this point. All right. Now we've squinted, right? We've gone to, we're seeing in terms of two values and stuff like that. What we're going to want to do now is add more values, right? Because this is kind of cool and everything, but this isn't actually what I was hoping for when I started the picture, right? I wanted it to have more information in it, more details in it, right? So I want to add more. And this is where the next challenge is going to come in. As I'm drawing, I'm going to mess this up. I actually still do this quite often. I do a good job simplifying the values. And then as I keep building, as I start to draw more and more, I end up zooming in and I add dark tones and then I add light tones, right? Because I want to add like these details, right? I want to add how it's dark in here, and I want to add how this bit of shirt might be a bit lighter or whatever, right? And I go too far with it as I'm drawing. So even though I've done such a good job in the beginning of keeping it simple, I mess it up. You know, as you get better, you're gonna do well in the early stages because you're practicing your simplification, and then you're gonna end up messing it up in the later stages. And that's how you know you're getting better, because you're like, oh, I didn't mess it up at the beginning. This time I messed it up at the end. So what I want to do is I'm going to slowly try to build up these values and the complexity of the shapes. I'm starting to allow myself to build up complexity in the shapes. And I'm just trying to add as much as possible one more value at this point. And still I'm trying to keep it pretty even, right, across the image. So what I mean by that is, I think I have this stage, it's not that one, here. Okay, I'm trying not to get too drawn into the little details and variations inside the shirt. I'm now just going to distinguish from this to this. I'm just adding one more layer of information, and so what I've done is I've gone, let me go here. What I've done is I've gone from this to this. And so in this next stage, I don't want to now forget everything that we've talked about and start going into details and stuff like that. I'm adding one more layer, and I'm trying to keep that layer as merged and simple as I possibly can. I want to stay on the big and simple as long as I can. All right. Okay. All right. So, and by the way, what I was talking about is like you mess it up at a late stage. How many times have you noticed that, where like you've been drawing for a while and now you're like scared once the initial sketch looks kind of all right, because you're like, I think I'm going to mess this up now. And you might think that that's a real disaster, but it's probably a sign that you're progressing, because your struggles are moving deeper into the process. But actually, what's going to save us later in the process is the same habits that we used in the beginning of the process. It's that same discipline. Yes, I'm adding a third layer of values. Yes, I'm allowing myself some more complex shapes, but I'm still trying to keep it simple. I'm trying to cling to the big and simple end as long as I can. All right. Okay. So what we want to be able to do ultimately is, if we do want to add details and stuff, we're going to want to be able to vary the values gently and subtly with our materials. And so this is kind of specific a little bit to the materials that you're using, right? If you're doing it digitally, you know, you can choose like, okay, I'm going to use this gray, and then I'm going to go a little bit darker than that, you know, on the next one. Or that was actually quite a big transition, so it would be less than that, right? Let me go. I don't really do much digital, but it would be smaller than that. Wow. Do you notice how small the value variation can be, and you can still see it and pick up on it? So you go real small variations, and you can still pick up on them, right? And this is one thing that we struggle with, is we're like, oh, this bit's a little bit darker than this bit, right? So we'll come in here and we'll go, oh, this side of the shirt over here overall is a little bit darker than the top, right? And we'll take that and we'll go, okay, so that means I'm going to go from here to here, not realizing that that's a massive value change, and we could have made it way more subtle and gentle of a value change, and it still would have been very visible, you know? And it's the same in the darks, right? If we're like, oh, this bit of shirt is a bit lighter than this bit of shirt, and then what we're going to end up doing is, when we're drawing that bit of shirt, we're going to go, okay, so here's the one bit of shirt, and then this is the darker bit of shirt, and we're going to have this really, really heavy, strong contrast happening inside the shadows. But what we could have done is had that variation be way more subtle. Even that is really strong. I'm trying to move it just a tiny little bit here. You know, it could have been a much gentler transition, because then visually I'm going to still have this overall, and then I'm going to be able to add lots of information inside without having to use some heavy contrast that's going to distract from the overall value structure that I initially created that looked good. Like this looks fine, and then I'm going to ruin it by adding this heavy contrast inside. So I want it, if I'm going to bring back the complexity, I want to do it so gently and subtly. And so if you're using a charcoal pencil like I was here, I'm going to want to learn how to use that charcoal pencil to be more gentle with the values. And it's something that I'm still working on a lot. How to do that without ruining it, you know? So that's what I'm going to try and do. Okay. Sue Fraser, yes. Saying general transitions, that's where you go wrong. Still too heavy-handed. Like, it can be just so gentle, and it will read, it will pick up on it. And then because it's so gentle, the overall, we're going to get these nice, big, simple shapes. And then there's these rich details inside, right? But they're very subtle, you know? All right. So hopefully I'm going to achieve something like that in here. I mean, even there, I think I'm a little bit heavy-handed, right? You see, I added the dark darks in the shadows, like his mustache there, you see? And like this. And I've added those, and this was a demo to show the right way to do this, okay? But if you look at the variation from his face to the mustache is so much more gentle than what I have in my drawing. I still like my drawing, don't get me wrong. But, you know, in my drawing, I'm going from like this to this. But in the reference, it was going from this to this. maybe it's not so bad. But this is a gentler transition than this. But maybe it's not such a bad, not such a bad effort. But I really tried, right, to keep those darks close. And they are very close, but you see how strongly we can still see them. And I think I could have kept that even more subtle. I do think his like moustache or his like eyelashes and stuff are standing out in my drawing a lot more than they are in the original reference, you know? Okay, so those were the 4 challenges. That's really, and now we're going to talk about how to get good at this skill, right? But just to kind of recap, the first challenge is that everything we're drawing, people and stuff, is incredibly complex, and we're not cameras and we're not printers. All right. The second challenge, what was the second challenge? Is we don't process values like a computer. Right? We process values in terms of their relationships, like what's next, how this relates to the thing next to it, and we over-exaggerate the contrasts. And so the solution there was, that squinting or zooming out or whatever, or applying a Photoshop filter if you really want to, and bringing it down to like 2 levels of value, something like that, and then building from there. The third challenge was that we then overcomplicate the shapes and the forms, and so we're going to simplify those too. And then the fourth challenge is, as we introduce more values, we do we basically have all of those risks again, right? We risk reintroducing all of those problems, overcomplicating the values, overcomplicating everything. So as we're drawing, we need to be very gentle and subtle with our values as well, right? Okay, so how are we going to get good at this, right? It seems kind of straightforward. I've given you a roadmap to doing it, but man, it's not easy to learn how to do. And so if you do struggle with it, don't worry, just keep going. You could be struggling, wishing your drawings were better, frustrated, and doing the right things, making good progress, on the right track. Like, these 2 sets of facts could be true at the same time. Feeling frustrated, wishing the drawings were better, feeling like there's a long way to go, doing just the right things, progressing well, right? These are not mutually exclusive. That could all be true at once, right? And in fact, it is true, I think, very often when we're learning this stuff, all of those things are generally true at the same time. It is possible to do practice where you don't make progress, as I mentioned earlier. But if you're practicing the simplification of values and forms, and you're also practicing your gesture, then the fundamentals basically, then you're probably doing the right things, and you just need to keep going with it, right? Okay, but okay, so Tessa asks a good question. If we're not cameras, not printers, and our brains are a nuisance, what are we wanting to be when we're drawing? Is it just a blob with a pencil squinting? So our brains are not terrible and useless. So what's really cool is that, wait, let me see Ozor's answer. It can become a help when it gets the message right. Exactly, right? So we wouldn't want to be a camera and a printer, right? Because we've got cameras and printers, and it's just going to reproduce the exact photons or whatever. What we can learn to do is gain mastery of these things, and now we can process these values into interesting shapes, into interesting ideas, into more interesting relationships than reality, right? How often are paintings just stunning or interesting in all these different ways? It's not because the artist has a different type of brain. They have the same type of brain, but they have worked on a powerful set of exercises, right, to gain mastery over these ideas, these simplification ideas. And once you've got that simplification, you can then design what you're going to do with the values, where you're going to bring out the contrast, how you're going to make that shape look. And so pretty much all the artists that we really love, right? Where whether it's like illustrators or fine artists or whatever, but it's kind of figurative, it's kind of based on reality, even if it's heavily stylized, they have gone through that process of learning to simplify reality into something that's manageable for us. And then now the brain is an asset, because now it can start to do cool things with it based on what we see, what we care about individually. So you're going to be able to, this is just an exercise, right? I don't love this drawing. This drawing doesn't express, my deepest, innermost, like visual, whatever, things that I want to get out to the world. This is just an exercise to learn how to simplify. But with those skills, I can produce interesting images that really express my visual experience of the world. And I want to get that. I want to get across to people what I find beautiful, what I find interesting. And that is possible, but we have to get this simplification stuff going first, and this big to small stuff going first. Okay. All right. So I got 10 minutes left. So I got a lot of important stuff to say. These are muscles that we're building. If you want to build a muscle, and the final state we want to be with our muscles is Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe he could like lift 200 kilos, let's say. Okay, so we go, all right, so I want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. He can lift 200 kilos. So I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to put 200 kilos on the bar, and I'm going to try and lift it. And obviously it's going to be very painful, and you're not going to become Arnold Schwarzenegger. You're just going to like break your back trying to do that the first day at the gym, or even a few years into it, right? What we want to do is put a weight on the bar that we can handle and lift that. And then the next time we've grown our muscles just a teeny tiny bit, and we'll put a tiny bit more weight on the bar and lift that, right? And so how can we reduce the weight on the bar? So we talked about grabbing master paintings where they've already simplified it for us, right? And then we can zoom out on them or squint at them or put a filter on them or whatever. It's a Sargent painting with a filter applied to simplify it down. We can grab a simple reference like this, which is actually pretty challenging because of some of the reflected light, but it's relatively simple. And we can practice with things like this and just try different things, right? And so we're going to slowly build the complexity, right? So this is a reference. It's a face, so it's much harder. It's a real face, but it's much harder. But it is lit from one side. So there's real clear-cut value differences between the side facing the light and the side facing away from the light. We can learn to simplify it into simple shapes. We can make the weight on the bar more manageable for us in a nice sequence of exercises. Okay, couple more examples. If you're in our study group, then you'll recognize this one, right? The original John Singer Sargent portrait, simplifying into black and white, simplify it into even simpler shapes, right? Now, do you guys mind if I promote our study group a little bit at the end of this? Now for the last few minutes, because our study group is amazing. So it's not just a bunch of demos where it's like, this is now I'm just drawing the arm, right? The study group is like a learning ecosystem or environment that you can go into. If you imagine like what it takes to really flourish, you need a whole system around you with different parts to it that allow you to grow, And so the different aspects of that are like really clear set of exercises which slowly increase that weight on the bar with really clear explanations. And so that's the courses that we have. Then you would want a teacher to look at your stuff and give you feedback, which is what me and Marek in the study group do in our feedback area. And study group members get feedback. It's so important and so useful, right? Then you'd want other people, if you want, going through it with you so that you're not alone, right? And you have someone to share that journey with and share the moments of doubt and all that kind of stuff. we are doing in our study group a fundamentals course where we're working on values, gestures, and simple forms. So the crucial skills you need for figure drawing starts on the 10th of January. So if you do want, you can start right now because already we have exercises in there, but you got to sign up by the 10th to really jump on board with it. And yeah, there's a link in the description of this. Maybe I can put it in the chat as well. But yeah, our study group, I'm so proud of it. I think it's really powerful, really effective. Let me put the link here in the chat if in case you do want to join it. Thanks guys, you're saying it was all right to do that little bit of promo there. The progress that people can make on these skills, when you go through a sequence of exercises that's easily explained, no 5-hour lessons, just concise lessons, and then you do that exercise and slowly build the weight on the bar, it's really impressive. So I had to censor all of these because I'm really nervous about YouTube, but yeah, we got Sandhya going from here, not really thinking about that, like kind of overwhelmed by the figure, and then making that progress, and then making that progress to that simplicity. You know, we've got, this is across a few weeks. You see the difference when you know what to look for, and you know it's just a few simple forms and a few simple shapes, instead of just being overwhelmed by the whole thing. And here, thinking about the shading that Tech here was doing, and then the shading that Tech was doing at the end, and then here's Mary's one. Simple, going from here to the simple forms, and then starting to like overcomplicate, like we talked about, the shapes, but then bringing it back. Such massive progress in our courses because we sequence things really well. So if you do, oh yeah, some members are giving some good reviews in the chat, appreciate it. Yeah, so I really recommend checking out our study group. It's a really wonderful way to learn. There are other ways to learn this stuff, but it's one way and it's a really good way. So thank you for hearing me out on that. Let me know in the chat if you do have any. Chris McGraw saying it's so worth it. Capital so. I really appreciate it, Chris. Thank you. Yeah. Tessa saying Marek's feedback in there is really fabulous, which I totally agree with. Jennifer saying I sign up in October. Jennifer's made massive progress. I want to show. I actually want to show. Wait, not like that. Full screen. I want to show. I think this is you, Jennifer, right? A few months ago, starting. Fresh eyes, right? And really making tons of progress already in a few months, right? And this is, we haven't worked on values with Jennifer yet, so it's still the forms, right? And the gesture and ideas like that. It's still the foundational stuff. And now with Jennifer, we're going to get into the values, so it's going to be super fun and powerful, right? This is what the courses look like inside. Gesture exercises. Oh my God. I hope that didn't. I have to blur something out there. That was a mistake. All right, so yeah, massive progress people have made. Okay. All right, I think that's it, guys. Jennifer saying, yeah, that's you. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, RH, there is a fee for the study group, right? So we have a lot of resources for free, but then if you really want to get into it and get serious, the study group is paid. That's how we function, how Love Life Drawing keeps going, and it's where you get the biggest results. Oh, Amanda, thank you. Right, you're saying it's worth every penny. I really appreciate it. Blackhound saying study group is amazing. Lots of support. Oh, Blackhound, I would like to know who you are, because it's just saying Blackhound. So who you are in our study group? Oh, it's Marv. Oh, hey Marv, how's it going? It's nice to see you here. Lots of support from the study group members. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. Jody saying your drawings have improved 80% after joining this group. That's really kind of you to say. Awesome drawings from Jody. Caroline, it is disappointing that YouTube's so strict with our art. I get it though. I understand there's like so much video getting uploaded that it's hard probably to manage it in any kind of refined way. So I've never really held it against them, to be honest. Tilda saying you're glad you started the study group. Thanks, Tilda. All right, so that's it. That's our time. You can always email me if you have any questions. It's kenzo@lovelifedrawing.com. If you're not sure about it, then just email me. And I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. All right, yeah, no worries, Fresh Chives. There's no worries. Join whenever you like. All right, cool. Yeah, so we're going to be running this fundamentals course covering these super important ideas this month. So yeah, come and sign up if you want to join in. All right. Thank you so much. Oh, thanks, Roman. I appreciate it. All right, I'll end it there. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you. And by the way, if you are in the study group, live lesson on Wednesday. Okay, see ya. Okay, what do I push?